Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Open Dialogue. I'm here with a few new guests, and as I discussed last week, I have brought in new topics discussing social issues that's actually going to be more powerful to the audience to deal with their issues in the household as well as what's happening around them in their communities and their society. The topic that I want to discuss today is regarding leadership and role models within the Muslim communities. We know that word very vaguely and we do use it very loosely, but it's actually of great importance, especially knowing that we followers of the Ahlebait and leadership is really, really vital, and it gives us our identity and it's the pure essence. But how can we use that in our practical daily lives? I have with me today some very, very familiar faces as well as some new guests. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Haider and Hakim and Sayyid Molana Razavi.
Thank you, Fahima.
Assalamu alaikum to you too. And hopefully we will be discussing this in more depth. I want to also introduce that Dr. Haider Hakim has written a book, Physicians on Fire. So you can actually take home this sort of book to actually, for personal development.
I wasn't expecting that, Fahima.
No, I know you weren't.
I wasn't really expecting that. But
I know you weren't.
Thank you so much.
No, of course. No, we have to promote and support. And you are not just a doctor, you are more, and we've worked together before. So I'd like to introduce you to the show.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here today.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Firstly, I just want to quickly have a definition. Because we have, a general sort of consensus that what leadership is, especially within management and business and things like that. But I'm talking more about leadership for an individual and where they can carry that forward, especially as Muslims, and how we represent ourselves.
That's many questions.
Yes. Okay. Well, you can
so
take it as
let's
you want.
start with the concept of leadership. I think what's important is that we're all potential leaders, and we can go even more than that and say we are born leaders. In the sense that the moment that you're born, you have to lead your life, and you have to lead something that is productive and something that grows. And the moment we're born, we're looking for this example of leadership. So it's ingrained within us. We have the ability, we have the potential, and that's why it's really important that, particularly as parents and particularly as spouses, that we have this awareness that whatever we do as individuals will have an effect on the child. So that's the first thing, is that we have to have the awareness that we are actually leading the younger generation from, not just from birth, but actually before birth. So, even in the womb. You need to have that mindset and that awareness that actually I'm leading this child or this newborn into the world. So that's the first thing, is that we need to take it as early as possible.
Do you think that leadership sometimes is not taken in its real context, because it's actually, the word comes to mind as it being an influencer, whereas most leaders more like they just want to maybe just carry people forward according to their own way.
We haven't got to the definition yet. This is just sort of a prerequisite to the whole leadership concept, in the sense that the human being is a natural leader. Now, the qualities of the leader and how you're going to go about doing it, and in which aspect, whether it's home, whether it's work, whether it's spirituality, whether it's psychologically and physically, that's a different aspect. But I just want to make sure that the viewers who are listening in today appreciate the importance of the whole concept of leadership for themselves and for the younger generation. Now, what is leadership? Well, essentially it's vision. Leadership is about vision. It's not something that we do today, it's about what's going to happen in the future. So having a long-term vision about where you want to be. And once you're able to clarify that, where you want to be, the next step is to communicate that to the people who are willing to follow you. So it's about vision, and obviously me being an ophthalmologist, I'm obsessed about vision. And the question is, do we have that realization? For a lot of people, they don't have visions.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a lot of people, they go wherever the current takes them.
Yeah.
They go wherever the current trend is. The current Snapchat, hashtag, whatever.
Yeah.
So, and that's because they've lost that self-awareness of the potential of being leaders, which is natural for all of us. So vision is the important thing, and we all have that ability to develop that vision. And one of the best ways to do that is to have role models, and is to have people who you consider as being great leaders. And if you look at their lives, it always starts with a vision. And this vision is, I wouldn't say it encompasses the world, it's larger than that.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a universal vision.
Right.
Okay, so it's something that is universal and encompassing of all mankind. And once you have this big picture, then you can put the pieces in place. And once you communicate that vision, people will latch on to you subconsciously and eventually consciously, and they think, do you know what, this man or woman is a leader. And it all comes from vision. So it's quite an interesting
so do you think there's a difference between
insight.
Leadership and role models?
So we need role models in order for us to understand how they got there. Okay, so we need to have physical steps in order to get to where they are, and that's where role models come in. But leadership comes under all of these banners. An easy way of becoming a leader is to look for mentors and role models, because then it's easier to understand how they got there. But vision is the first thing, then communication is the other thing. That's really important, communication. And a great leader is someone who communicates very, very well. And as you know, communication only comes really from listening.
Of course. No, of course.
There are people that can talk non-stop, and there's a word for that. It's like a tape. Tape that you switch on. But it does come from listening, and that completes the cycle of the vision.
And we also can go into how we listen, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
So, Sayyid, when it comes to leadership, generally, what does the scriptures say, and how important it is to the Muslims Ummah to have leadership?
Yeah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. One of the beauties of Maktab of Ahlebait or Madhab of Ahlebait alayhim salatu wasalam is that it gives a lot of emphasis on leadership. And I could say that the reason we are considered to be different from our other Muslim brothers and have a different opinion is due to the leadership. And according to narrations, leadership is so important. The leadership in our Aqidah, in our faith, is translated as an Imam. An Imam is so important that if we do not have Imam or leader, our community would be scattered.
Yes.
And these are not my words, these are the words in hadith, in narration, that it's asas and base of society, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as a wise creator, has created us as a social being. And one of the requirements of social being is to have a leader. And without leader, we would not be able to work and function properly. I don't know whether you agree with this.
Yeah, totally. I mean, what makes us and breaks us is actually the leader.
Yeah.
So if we have the right leadership in place, we have a vibrant and energetic community. And vice versa.
In today's society, sorry to cut you quickly, I just wanted to say that the reason why I brought this up is because today's generation is maybe not having that leadership or that role model, or if there is, they not seem to follow it. And I feel that people are sort of like, going from different sections that they shouldn't be. And, I want to address this in a more depth as we go along in the discussion. But obviously we're starting from the top. But the thing is, what makes a leader is what I want to know, that people would actually want to follow.
So, as a young individual, when I was growing up here in London in the 80s, I had a lot of leaders to look up to. Pillars in the community. An example was Sayyid Mahdi Hakim. So for me, the importance and the characteristics of a leader was instilled in me by modeling these people in our community and in our society. So I think modeling is really important.
Of course. How were you introduced to that leader, though? Was it through parents? What was the influence?
Well, he was a relative.
Okay.
Yeah, so he was a relative. And, I think being from a religious and a political family, that played a big part, and it influenced me greatly. But previously we didn't have social media, previously we didn't have that sort of influence, that outside influence that can come into our homes and, let's say, can confuse things for people. So for me, I had no other choice, if that makes sense. Whereas now, because you have so much more choice, it does cause a lot of confusion.
Yes.
So the youth or the young, because I consider myself old, although the Sayyid says that life starts at 60.
Yes.
Isn't it, Sayyid?
You're not born yet.
I'm not born yet, which is really, which is lovely, to be honest. I don't think the wife will be happy.
Well, definitely, if you are not born yet, she's not born yet.
She's not born yet, yeah. An unborn relationship. So yeah, I mean, we didn't have so many choices and so many noise, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So we were able to find who the true leaders are and copy them and emulate them and do what they do and speak how they speak and dress how they dress.
Yes.
So, that was really important for us, and I think that was the reason why we had a lot of characteristics of good leadership. Whereas now, you have a lot of
influences.
I'd say fake people rather than influencers. Yeah. I mean, I would say fake people, fake gurus, wannabes, people who haven't done that being there. It's just marketing, it's just concocted copywriting or whatever you want to call it. It has been commoditized.
Yes.
The word leadership and the issue of leadership. So the waters are murky. So we've got people like the Sayyid, who's been there, done that, seen that, and it's important to sort of copy him.
Of course. But for the young, even if we have these ulama and the scholars, do you not see the importance, especially Sayyid, that we should have more different sort of background, different sort of like role models and leaders within our community who are not just of that level, of a high level, because we want to be able to be more relatable. Sorry, I do have a caller online before I come back to you. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Welcome. What is your question?
Well, interesting, mashallah, discussion you're having, and I'd like to participate in the conversation and contribute.
Definitely. And your name, sir?
I'm going to say something that maybe a lot of brothers and sisters don't want to hear.
Okay.
At the moment, let's be honest with each other.
Sure.
We don't have a leadership. What we have is a readership. We have people who read their sermons from the pulpit. Okay. There's no engagement of people who are reading to us and what is going on in the community. Whether you agree or disagree with this, you only have to look at the example with what's going on with the debate regarding LGBT and in the schools. There's no political leadership or representation. There's no religious leadership or representation, and the community is having to answer these questions themselves. Whether you agree or disagree, that's a completely different debate.
No, I take your point.
But we have educated people in this country who've been educated through the system, very articulate, When you listen to them, when they obviously do their talks, and we have these wonderful academies apparently where all the scholars are meant to be being produced from, the Muslim scholars, brothers and sisters coming through. Yet at this moment in time, in the millennium, we can't say that we have this person who represents us and our voice is being heard.
Okay. What would you like to see then?
I would like to see somebody actually take up this issue and actually mobilizes the community, because the community is there. It's a captive audience. When you go to a mosque, when somebody leads a prayer, you've got the followers behind. Just turn around and you'll see the followers behind you.
Okay.
So the followers are there, but there's nobody actually leading the followers anywhere. We're not going nowhere.
Right.
And that's something that I don't think anybody really is understanding. We seem to be defining our religion around populism. So I'd like the guests to obviously agree or disagree with my views and share the respected views. And I'd like to thank you for the opportunity for me to share my views with you.
No, thank you for calling in. I really appreciate that. So does anybody want to sort of maybe give a response to that? Say it.
As far as LGBT is concerned, there is a lot going on in our community, and there are scholars and sisters and brothers who are quite educated in this, and they have launched campaigns and activities are going on. But I do agree with brother that in majority of the centers and mosques, what you see is just an imam going on the mimbar or in mihrab leading them and not giving any not addressing any of these issues. Some of the khutbahs are also just pre-written and published khutbahs. They just read from them.
Yeah, repeat.
Probably half of the crowd don't even understand what is being read to them. Yeah, the idea of khutbah and Jummah is to address the issues of the society and current issues, especially to build the character of the community. So it is very important, and yes, we need to give more platform to the leaders or the people who understand what's going on in relation to LGBT and how they are campaigning. They should be given, and we have invited on this show. We have
Definitely
addressed this issue many times.
Maybe it might not be seen on the mainstream channels. That's why we have channels like this to actually speak out and actually have a voice and be heard. What is your thoughts, Dr.
Well, I mean,
Haider?
he made a very, very good point, and the fact that the imams are not communicating with the audience and not being relevant as well.
Yeah.
And those are two things that I mentioned earlier, is that our leaders have to be relevant to the current situations, the political, social, economical situation, and also be open to debate and even, God forbid, criticism, where the leader can sit down and can listen to the suggestions of the congregation. And this is where leadership comes in. This is where the concept of listening comes in.
Yes.
And it's only through listening, and it's only through accepting that as long as you have that vision for the community. I mean, has there been a time where community leaders sit down with their congregation and say, look, this is our vision for where we want to be in 2025 or 2030. I want to be there. Let's go together. And the word is together.
Yeah.
You know, leaders can't go there by themselves. That's not called a leader. That's called, I don't know, maybe a madman or mad woman or you know, a loner or whatever. But it takes, you know, it takes guts from the leader to say, yeah, I need your help about this.
I guess also in our community, because we, even though we're in large numbers, especially in the Ahlebait, but we are the minority and we're not given that voice. And to be fair, even if there are leaders out there, they're not given that platform and they're not given the space. That's what I find. And also leaders need to come together, because it don't just takes one. It doesn't just take one person. Even with ulama, even with the scholars, it has to be collaboration. It has to be alliances. And the vision as well. When you say there's a vision, people have to share that vision, and it has to be obviously a vision where it's for the people. It's not a personal thing. We have to get off our own egos, which is very important.
Yeah, I mean, a leader is never a personal thing.
Yes.
I mean, once you turn it into a personal thing, you're not a leader. You know, it is an egoistic trip. So, but it's difficult in this day and age of social media razzmatazz, I think. And, you know, that's something I personally think will get worse over the years rather than better.
Worse than how?
We don't communicate as much as we used to. You know, we rarely call each other. We rarely visit. You know, we may text each other.
Yeah, I think it's the world's communicating is different. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And the communication is it's not so personal. And as I was talking earlier before the call, that's what actually he brought me into the topic, was wondering as to what kind of leaders do we need in society today, other than, you know, just relying on the ones that have, you know, studied in the Hausa, for example, and even they are quite far away from what is happening in society and in today's day and age. So how can we sort of bridge that gap as well as bring new leaders that can actually address these social issues and influence and help the community?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very good point. I know personally many highly educated scholars. They are very good in the education and field they have studied, but they don't have basira and they don't have the vision. They don't understand the politics. They don't understand what is needed in the society. So whole of their knowledge is just wasted, or it just becomes a book of theory for maybe some academic, in academic circles only. So that is why it is important. I remember one of my teachers was saying that, which doesn't happen now, in maybe around 100 or 200 years ago, Najaf suddenly lost a marja taqleed. And then there were three great scholars in the city. So they suddenly had a meeting with each other. They said, let's decide about the future of the Marja'iyya and leadership. So the two educated ones chose the person who was more popular in public by leading the prayer in one of the harams. I don't remember which. But because he was a very popular figure, he could understand the problems of the people. They said, you become the leader and we, with our knowledge, will back you up. So that kind of cooperation is needed in our present leadership. And unfortunately, what we are witnessing, and I've seen many centers going down, or many countries losing everything, because the leader has ego, or doesn't think of the interest of the people, or the interest of the future of the people or country.
I mean, I know of some centers today that they only have their own members from their own background that would actually only represent a particular thing, a particular mosque or center, because they don't want outsiders' influence, thinking that they're the only ones that get it right. And we're not going to name anyone here, but they know who they are. And this happens in every single community. So when we have leaders like that, when we have people that, you know, carry on and work in that way, what hope do we have? Forget social media then, because this is happening in our centers, where the centers are taken over by a particular background, because they are the ones that only want to be, you know, at the forefront making decisions and choices, not thinking that, for example, if someone says, I want to give charity, but they're only going to give charity to a Shia community, not to a Christian community, is that right? You know, this is how we got to think. It's about humanity. It's about building a space.
Has that always been the case, or do you think it's got worse over the years?
I think it's been around for a while where it's been like that, but I think more and more now, because people, as much as we are open, we are much more segregated. I think there's a fear still. Instead of being open.
Why is there a fear? I mean,
because even though we're living in the West, we're fearful of, from my opinion, working on the ground with a lot of people and talking and listening to them. It's that integration is scary because they're not powerful enough, thinking that they're the ones that are going to influence, but they're the ones that are going to be influenced. See, there's a difference. If you're not powerful, I remember Said giving me a story once when I asked him about, how do we send our children out into this world with them not being influenced? And he was like, well, you've got to build certain characters within a child. So if you're going to send them out to a river to collect water, are you going to send the one that's strong enough to be carried away with the water, or the one that's actually going to be able to strong enough to bring that water even in that rough tide?
So where are they going to get these characters from? This
Yes, that's the next thing that I was going to go on to.
This ability of character and internal qualities and iman, essentially.
Of course.
And that only comes from, if it's not from Ali's, at least from our parents.
Exactly.
And that's
Our parents
something
need to be
that's
leaders.
essential, and something that I think in our younger generation, like when I was growing up in the 80s, parents took that on as a default because of, I think, it was much more difficult to live then. It was less integrated, and I think life was more difficult.
In what sense? Because people say it can be difficult now as well. There's more mental health.
I think there was a lot of mental health back then,
We
actually.
still diagnose it.
Yeah, there was a lot of mental health back then, but people never used to sort of talk about it as much, and
It wasn't recognized.
I think it was recognized. I think it was recognized and it was treated, but it wasn't as socially acceptable. For them to sort of talk about it. It's very much talked about in general society. In the Muslim community, it's still not talked about as it should, and that's a major issue. I think before, racism was a lot more clearer, which means that you had a lot more disadvantages before in society, and now that's not legal anymore. So there is a legal framework for that, whereas before there wasn't a legal framework. So I think life was much more difficult then. So the parents, from my experience, took it upon themselves to step up and become the leaders, and become the character bearers, and became the person who taught us how to be, so that when we go out into the world, we knew how to act, we knew how to be, we knew our boundaries, which is very powerful when you go out there in society. If you know your boundaries,
Definitely.
people can't take advantage of you, and people can't abuse you, people can't influence you as well. So I think back then, it goes back to choice as well. Because we had less choices, it was much clearer for us where our vision is now. Whereas now, I think the clear vision's not there.
I think society has changed as well. The household has changed. The way we live. A lot of it is based around the secular idea of just education in that, getting to become, having the academics, and that's it.
Yeah.
And most households are only living through that, and having religion is just, not an actual living.
Just a knowledge thing.
Yeah.
It's literally just a knowledge thing.
That's what it is.
And I personally think that the religious child in the 80s is more philosophical than a secular professor of philosophy.
Oh, absolutely.
Because they do have what our parents instilled in us is not just the knowledge, but the way to live their lives.
Yes.
And they had to do that because of the situation that they were in. We, coming from an Iraqi background, if you showed your faith, you'd die. So having that kind of existence made you really live your religion and your life and your philosophy, which is different from just knowing the knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's very character building.
So how can we build our character, Sayed? How can we get to a level with today's society and today's level of living where it's so materialistic, and parents are losing their rights, not just even out of what the government or society is saying, but they themselves, majority of them are working, they're not spending time at home. And I'm not saying you shouldn't work, but the quality time is not even given in the moments that they do have with their children. I know you homeschool your children. We'll come back to that as
Yes.
well, which is really interesting. So what is the characters that we need to have today?
Well, if you look at the secular society and the leaders of the secular society, they understand this point of view, and they are promoting the secular type of leaders in the community. I mean, like Hollywood and other institutions, they are working hard in establishing those role models. We as a Muslims are not promoting, and in some cases we feel even inferior. We have inferiority complex about our own leaders. And this is what Quran says, that if we need to be successful, we need to build confidence within ourselves and also inject or feed confidence to our children, our future generation. They should not have inferiority complex. They should look for the leaders within our circle, within our community, and it is the responsibility of the establishments which produce leaders like Islamic seminaries or other institutions. They should also invest a lot on education of the future generation in a way that they become the role models of the future, by looking at what Quran keeps on saying, that why don't you look at the example of the past, learn from the history in the past, learn from the leaders in the past, and gives, there are verses of Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one after another, gives example of each prophet and tells how they were successful and what they did and what they did. So we need to elaborate more on that and build those kind of leaders with basira and vision for our society.
Dr. Haider, how do you think is that going to be possible, and is it possible to have the past and our history in today's society and live it practically with those lessons?
So coming together like this and having these discussions is important, and I think for me the important thing is relevance. So making sure that whatever we're going to convey, whatever message that we're going to put across from our scriptures and from history is relevant for today's middle-aged people, teenagers and young people, which is where the listening comes in. So we have to listen to exactly what their issues are, what their problems are, what are they going through, what are their difficulties, what are their challenges,
what are their wants?
What do they want?
Yeah.
What do they want? And once you sit down, then you'd be able to address all of these things, because we have a basis, we have a foundation which we can build upon. But it only comes through swallowing one's own ego and understanding that we are up to the task, we do have the confidence, we do have the self-esteem, we do have the ability, but we just need to come down a notch, listen to our community, just like that speaker said, please listen to us, we've got these issues. And then we have the knowledge, so the knowledge is there. I think we just need to make it relevant and bring it into the 21st century.
I guess also he highlighted that there is no leaders for, as far as he is concerned, they're not actually coming out and speaking openly, whether they're given the platform or not. They're not standing tall and actually representing. I think a lot of us that could be potential leaders are not actually putting ourselves out there and being that first step.
Well, channels like here, it's giving opportunity for people to express their views and for people to sort of call in and so on. I think if there's more opportunity like this, open dialogue, open respected dialogue, it only has great benefits, really.
And normally leaders are also, as you say, they need to be listening to others. But don't you feel that sometimes leadership, they are looked upon and listened to in a particular way, which puts pressure on them, that they don't want that stand because they actually are given a particular way of being which is actually not normal, like, oh, well, now you're on TV, or now you're a speaker, and now you're this, you shouldn't be doing that. Like, how does that come across to you?
Well, that's what being a leader is about. You know, it's about sacrifice, and it's about getting the first arrow. You know, leaders are at the front,
Yeah.
whether you like it or not. And we all have that ability, which is why I started with, you know, from the womb you're a leader, because we're always striving to grow and get better and improve as a human being, because that's the Islamic way. But that's a consequence of being a leader, and that's just the way it is.
That can be the
Maybe not
consequence.
everyone can step up and say,
Yeah.
which is fine, and there are different stages in a person's life and life cycle. But no, I mean, it's not for everyone, you know, being at the front,
Oh, definitely
you know,
not.
right at the front.
Yeah.
But then once you instill that characteristic as that leader, that will slowly diffuse into the rest of the people, and then they become leaders for their families, for their smaller communities, for the workplace, for the other communities that they work in, the charity work. So that sort of instills down into you being a leader in smaller communities. But it doesn't need to start with big ladies, big leader ladies, big men ladies, and
Yeah.
you know, that's how it goes.
I guess what my point was, and I agree with you totally, is also because we are talking to the general public and the viewers. To actually have the general public and the viewers open up a way of listening so that they're not too critical of the leaders as well. We need to also take responsibility as individuals. I have come up with these topics because I deal with, you know, everyday people, knowing and hearing, like yourself, and the Sayyid, as to what actually are the issues and the problems. And I don't just want to talk one-on-one. So, alhamdulillah, I'm given this platform. So I'm here to talk to the viewers, to say, if you even see a leader, the first thing, even if you study in psychology, and it tells you how people listen, and they literally listen to criticize and judge to begin with first. And we know that we got to give 70 excuses to begin with, but no, our Muslims will do the complete opposite. And I'm going to call people out on that. So give people a chance when they actually are stepping up, and listen to the substance and the content, and look behind whatever even you see on front. Because this is where then the chances will become more, and people will be more willing to become leaders, knowing that they have got also supporters, because it's actually a big role to take on, to be sitting here, to be speaking, whether it's on this platform or any other platform, like you said before. Being a leader is obviously a responsibility, and people do look up to them as a role model, but then the general public have this persona and assumption on certain ones that they want to just bring them down on other areas instead of concentrating on what that leadership vision is. And so that's why even great leaders have come down, because sometimes the pressure is too much. And I think that is something that also we need to be aware of. I think in the second part we will...
But having said that, the onus is still on the leader
Oh, absolutely.
to listen to all these views, listen to all these criticisms, the haters and everything, and take it on board.
Yes.
And by doing that, the followers will understand that, yeah, you know, I've criticized them so much, and yet they're still
standing.
They're
Of
still
course,
standing.
of
So then
course.
that sort of
It's a
encourages
both way.
them. Yeah,
it's a both way thing.
I mean, it's not easy.
Yeah.
I mean, particularly sitting next to the Sayyid here, you know, it's totally overawed.
Well, you know, I'm going to continue with this topic after the break, after Salah, because I think I want to go more into the household and into the communities and societies that we live in today, and the actual issues. And so, Hakim, assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum
Thank you for
assalam.
joining me.
Thank you.
And also, we have is Molana Sayyid Razavi. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum.
And we're going to be continuing with more in depth. I have come up with these topics for, you know, this sort of particular program because I want to bring in sort of different ideas and solutions, practical solutions for your household. We have to take responsibility as individuals today, as our community is growing, and which is a good thing, but we need to grow in the right direction. And we also need to take responsibility ourselves in being in a particular way for ourselves, for our families, for society, and for community. I deal with people on a daily basis as my own profession, being a life coach. And I've also produced shows and come up with many topics. But this is one channel that gives me the real sort of dimension to go further and deeper. As we have discussed and we know in this show, that even being politically involved is part of our status to become more involved as to what's happening around us. Don't be just, doing things just by what you hear and see from even, people around you. You need to take, sort of like time out yourself to create that vision that Dr. Haider Hakim was talking about, to create goals and outcomes so that we can take steps forward. I recently read a book called From I to We, meaning that we need to be more of a community. We need to take steps to move forward. And in that book, it was actually highlighting individual stories, even children's that were in college and sort of school, that felt the need that they needed to stand up for children around the world that were being enslaved. And they actually made a difference to the world in the future. So that was inspiring. And this has inspired me to take upon this sort of like topic and bring guests in, which are different and part of the community. Dr. Haider has been part of the community for many years. He's traveled to Iraq and he's been here. And he's actually been in the community involved in various ways. We have Sayyid Molana Razavi, who's been part of the community for many years in centers and to individuals, in families, working for many years and knowing what the social issues are. So don't take whatever is being said lightly. This is not just pure entertainment. This is real life. This is real life issues. And I want to hopefully continue with the discussion so that we can bring on more solutions for all of us to use practically. So Dr. Haider, as we were discussing earlier about role models, I find that in the household, people are not, parents in particular, are not being those role models. And I understand that we have, a different environment today in living where a lot of people are working, both parents are working, time is limited, you yourself is one of that. So what could be the practical solutions to overcome what's happening today and still bring in the role model, the influence, the leadership within your household, which is so vital because that foundation sets us up, like you said earlier, for the future?
Wow, that's a big one.
But you're doing it.
I think self-awareness is really important.
Yeah,
so self-awareness of the parent, both parents, and it is a contract between the parents. So, it's not just the father or just the mother, or maybe even just the grandparents. It is a dialogue and a contract between two individuals who have to take the responsibility of bringing up their child. It is as serious as that. Maybe I've gone to the extreme because I homeschool our children.
Talk to me about that, because we don't find many people openly talking about that.
Well, I think it's a combination of my experience, going through school, being institutionalized essentially, being told how to think, the way to think, and I'm a fan of critical thinking, and I don't think school teaches you enough about critical thinking. And for me, I've developed this critical thinking through life rather than school.
Of course.
So, from my own experience, plus looking at my son, how he changed as a human being going through school, I realized that schooling wasn't for him. And also researching the homeschooling topic as well, that made me realize that human beings are natural learners, and they don't need to be in a learning environment for them to learn, because they naturally learn. It's just who we are as human beings. But you do have to give them that environment which is conducive for learning.
Yes.
So therefore the parents need to realize that, this may sound very blasé. I'm sure they realize that they've got young human beings that they're responsible for. But do they do it? And are they self-aware of the importance of them as role models for their children? They can't pass the buck to me or the Sayyid or yourself or the teachers or society. They take full responsibility for bringing up that child. So if there's a problem with the child, the parents take full responsibility for that. And that's quite a harsh thing to say, and that's quite a stark thing to say, but that's the reality of things. I've taken it to the extreme because I'm not convinced of the schooling system, and I've put it on my, essentially I'm responsible. So, you know, if my children fail, I'm responsible for that. I'm 100% responsible for that. So I think there's that aspect, the importance of self-awareness from the parents, that they are responsible, 100% responsible for the upbringing of the child. Once they come to that realization, they need to have the skills.
Exactly. Yeah, of course.
They need to have the skills, not just the knowledge, but the skills.
It is a skill to be a parent.
And our community, does it have the skills to teach our parents how to be parents in a holistic, complete approach? Probably not, because it does take experts in education, experts in child psychology, experts in society, experts in linguistics, experts in pediatric physiology and so on. So, I mean, you know, it is a broader topic, but they can read outside the normal recommended reading.
Yeah.
So, I you know, having this self-awareness that you do actually have to be quite encompassing in developing this human being. And, you know, maybe from when they're about to get married, you know, they literally should be having courses on parenting. So that
courses on everything, even marriage.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that, you know, that's a prerequisite, isn't it, for them to get married? It's like, right, these are the responsibilities, these are the rights, these are the pros and cons and so on. But once you get into the realms of parenting, it's a totally different ball game. And, you know, it is something that shouldn't be taken lightly at all. And, you know, for me, I think I've seen lots of successful parents, and they're the ones who've taken it just so seriously, or at least given themselves that realization of the self-awareness that they're taking on full responsibility for everything about the child.
And like you said, you were blessed, you know, being brought up in a family like you were, and obviously having those role models set for you. But I also want to make aware to the audience that even not having that, you can, you know, especially with the world outside, as much as we might dislike what's around us and the openness, but that actually has given us no excuse to actually look for even the good and the right
we need to
amongst
understand
that.
At the end of it. We need to understand, and you know, I don't want to say the best of humans, but the one who's successful are the ones who are out there to understand.
Yeah.
You know, not to judge and not to analyze and not to criticize, and you know, not to sort of jump on a certain train of thought or sort of bandwagon, but just to sit there and understand. And then once you understand things, you realize that there's a lot of things that you need to understand about yourself as well at the same time. So it's going back to that self-awareness and self-realization that you have to do a lot of work. And then once you do a lot of work, your children see that you're doing a lot of work for yourself, and then they realize that, and then they do their self-work as well. So, and as you know, as parents, it's not what you say, it's what you do.
Yeah.
You know, it's in your actions, not in your words.
Definitely.
You know, that is the most important thing as a parent, is that the children from the age of 6 months, 3 months, you know, really small age, they look at your actions, never your words.
A lot of studies have actually backed up what you've said, to say the development of children is via, you know, that's why we say that parents have to be role models and leaders and influencers, because it's their actions that actually are portrayed to the child, and that's what they copy, that's what they learn from. As much as people might blame society, the system, and even going into school, it's actually the home. And that's what I keep trying to remind parents, even if you send your kids to school 8 hours a day, and yes, they might seem to be institutionalized, but you don't realize the impact that you have, and that can really outweigh a lot. So don't just feel that even without having the skill, even though it can be learnt and it should be developed regardless, and even sending your kids to school, it's okay as long as you give them that extra learning and the extra way of being. And say it again, I was coming to thought as when Dr. Haider was speaking, when we have responsibility on ourselves, if we all thought that our children were not ours and belonged to us, because it's actually, you know, we are here to serve our Creator, and that's our responsibility, I think we would look at life and treating other humans, especially our own children, in a different way.
Yeah, it's our responsibility to bring them up for the future. And that's what a narration in hadith clearly says, that your children are not for the time that you are growing, they are for the time in future. So the parents have responsibility to bring them up in that order. And only a few days ago I was invited in a wedding and was requested to give a talk. And usually one of the very, very common narration that is quoted in the marriages is that get married and have children.
Yeah.
And don't worry about sustenance and rizq and bounty. Allah is the provider.
Of course.
Yeah, there is no doubt about that. But I mentioned that. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not guaranteed the tarbiyah, the education. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wants to be proud of a Muslim nation, not a number of children who become atheists later on.
Yes. Yes.
So if the couple who have married and they are 100% sure that they would not be able to bring up their children with good tarbiyah in Islam, they will not be the source of pride for Prophet Muhammad on the Day of Judgment, which is the hadith which is quoted. So it is our responsibility and duty to provide that environment for the future. And as brother is homeschooling his children, we had programs on homeschooling here on Open Dialogue as well, and we discussed a lot. And at SI Education Society also we had several sessions on homeschooling, and we concluded that all the role models that Islam has were produced by homeschooling.
Wow.
Prophet Muhammad and all holy imams who was educating, they were being homeschooled. So homeschooling can produce role models.
Absolutely.
There is absolutely no doubt.
Yeah.
And there are countries in Europe which are relaxing the rigid rules and restrictions on schools.
Yes.
And they are more successful in education.
Absolutely. Even sending them later to school in Europe, some of the most brightest and most...
Probably this is what we need to look, and maybe brother can share his experience and that how successful he is in homeschooling.
We're going to watch your children grow.
Well, yes, they've been watching them grow for a long time, and you know it is an interesting challenge because you know my mother didn't agree with it at all, my dad didn't agree with it. My brothers and sisters think I'm a bit, you know...
Yeah.
How are they going to become doctors and lawyers and, you know, politicians and things like
that?
Well,
I don't know what they're going to become.
Well, that's what the norm is, right?
Yeah, unfortunately. But I think what's important is that you give them space to grow.
Yeah.
And you facilitate their education, and that's what we do, really. And,
well, you've got hope and faith, and you've got belief by saying that. A lot of parents don't.
Really?
And I think so, because that's why they turn to the institute.
But that's powerfully
of course.
negative.
I know. Unfortunately, like I said, I deal with people a lot. And again, it's more about the secular education that's what's most important. As you know, even coming from the community that you are in. It is definitely...
Which is very narrow-minded.
Being a doctor.
Which is very narrow-minded. I mean, even being a medical doctor and looking at the caliber of doctors who are coming through, it is worrying. Because...
Explain more.
Well, because, you know, they are secular, educated professionals, which, with all due respect, they don't have enough spirituality in their existence, which, you know, is a disadvantage.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, there will come, you know, they're going to knock into life experiences that will make them question their lives. Hence
the book that you've written, right?
Yeah, the book that I wrote really is a story of my mistakes and misdemeanors and not such good experiences. And that's to show my vulnerability in my life and the difficulties that I went through and what I did to overcome them. And most of it is a metaphysical journey,
right,
rather than a physical journey. And I think if we celebrate the metaphysical, as much as the physical, I think will be a much more holistic human being. I wanted to say that in terms of home education, we're not saying it's for everyone, because we're not saying that this is the only path.
No.
There are some people who are very academic.
Yeah, which is fine.
Some people who love to be within the institution, and I think for them they'll excel in these certain environments. What is important is that the parent realizes that they're a conduit for the success of their child. They're not the driving force.
No, they're not.
They're there to give them the raised spirit so that they go out there and be who they truly are.
Like, that's a very open view as to how you would think and say. A lot of people, even students, do come and talk to me a lot, and they are forced in a particular way, and they're driven and they're influenced, not just through education, but then it comes down even through marriage and being married in a particular way to particular people. If they say it, it has to be said. If they're
and as you know, if you're pushed in a certain direction, you push back.
Yeah,
the more you get pushed, the more resistance happens. It may not happen. It may not happen immediately or in the short term, but in the long term,
yes,
you do get resistance, and you do get psychological and spiritual.
I was just going to say,
discomfort.
with the mental health, and I'm not saying it wasn't there before, but I think we're seeing a different type of mental health today. And I think that different type of mental health is to do with the way in which we are, bringing out ourselves in this world, with the way in which we live. And it's not the spiritual way majority of the time. It is more to do with what's out new, what's the latest trend, like you mentioned. And the influences are of no credibility nowadays. It's very easy to get so many followers just by doing silly things, but when you've got real substance and content, it's very hard, actually.
Yeah. People are not interested.
They're not interested in that.
People are not interested in this. I hope millions of viewers are watching this today.
I'm sure they are.
But if you don't say these things, people do switch off, and that's fair enough, because there is a lot of noise that people have to sift through.
Who was your role model growing up?
So my role model was Sayyid Mahdi al-Hakim when I was growing up, and he was a political figure back in the before 60s, 70s, and 80s. But the reason why he was a role model is because he was such a kind guy, and he was softly spoken when he was with me, and he was at my level. I felt he was at my level. He came down to my level, so I saw that. His humanism and his humbleism and his essentially being like a normal human being. And at the same token, when he was up on the stage, he was a lion.
Right.
He was roaring, and he was championing, the downtrodden and the
just everyone. The imprisoned and the tortured people. So I saw the stark difference, and I thought, wow, this man can be really humble and at the same time really powerful. As you were speaking, actually, you just made me realize what I want to say next, and that is to do with a leader's character. A lot of leaders today, they even may have those, roaring characteristics, and they appeal to the masses. But you also have to be humble, and you have to be approachable and inviting.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the leaders, when they take these roles and they have a particular position as well, they become to a certain level where they're not on your level. And when you sit with them, there is a problem, and you feel that they're unreachable. They're unreachable to the most. And we're trying to highlight as to what are the things, we need to be as leaders. It doesn't mean that you hold this position, you have a title, you have certain amount of, followers or backing, and you have an audience now. So, that's it. We can't talk to the norm, and we can't be with the norm. So say it, in your experience, like, how do we, put ourselves down a notch in order to be leaders and humble and approachable?
What Dr. Hakim mentioned just now reminds me of an incident that took place during Prophet Muhammad's time. He was walking through streets of Medina or Mecca, I don't remember which city, but he saw some youngsters fighting with each other. So he was going on his mule or horse, whatever he was using. So when he saw this dispute between the children, he did not stay on his mule or horse. He came down and brought himself to the level of the child and established eye contact with them and talked to them and sorted out the problem. And nowadays, this is what people, I mean, if you watch the TV programs who teach how to train the children,
Yes.
they say the same thing.
Yes.
If you stand and order, your child will become rebellion. He will not listen or she will not listen. But if you bring yourself down to their level, establish eye contact and speak to them as equals, respect them, you might get the message through.
Exactly.
And this is what Prophet Muhammad used to say. So he understood the psychology of human being and children. And unfortunately, in our society, and I have mentioned, this is not a criticism, this is something that I have noticed after Islamic Revolution in Iran. If you look at the scholars before Islamic Revolution in Iran and scholars after Islamic Revolution in Iran, the scholars before Islamic Revolution, the highest ones were available for public connection.
Yes.
But I'm not blaming them, but after Islamic Revolution, because of the attacks, I mean, like his 70, 60 members of his family were killed. And I've known them personally, and this is what happened. But what has this done is pushed the leaders away from the community. There are so many security guards, or most of the scholars are just sitting behind the tables and not having direct connection with the people, which is keeping them away from each other, and that is not fruitful. And that's what we need to do, especially Islamic seminaries. When I was, before Islamic Revolution, studying in House Ilmi Qum, the students were sent from the early stages of studies to preach and mix with the people in the far and remote villages, so they can understand the problem and learn to answer the questions. But this is not happening now, and the mosques and the centers in this time and age where social media is available, probably a Christian scholar can answer that question from America easily than the local scholar who has been given the responsibility of a mosque, because the reason he's been given the responsibility, no one else is to take that responsibility. So possibly the local mosques imam in Iraq or Iran nowadays is the least educated one, which has the responsibility of teaching and educating the youth who have connection with mobile to anywhere in the world. So this is, we need to change a lot. We have to invest a lot on.
I think having programs like this is really important, to have these dialogue from people in different walks of life. And going back to other role models, it's important to have role models not just in your spirituality and in Islam, but also at work as well. So one of my best role models was when I was a junior doctor. I had an excellent consultant rheumatologist, and he happened to be Iraqi. And the great thing about him is that he had such a great sense of humor, just breaking those, serious times when you're sort of in these difficult situations, and also just really approachable and available. Available. So if I had a problem, he's available, and he'd sit there and listen to me. So he had a massive influence on me, and now, I work in private healthcare, and I'm working with over 40 people. So that puts me in good stead to know that I need to be accessible, and I need to come down to everyone's level, whether it's senior management, clinicians, healthcare professionals, and even the cleaners. I need to be at their level where they're comfortable and they're able to relate to me and able to communicate their needs and wants and abilities and concerns. So it's important to have these role models in different walks of, different aspects of your life. I think that's important.
Absolutely. I think also, as humans, we do have this natural egotistic mind and state, which we also have to be aware of so that we can actually perform and use it to our benefit and where it serves us. But most of the time, it's not necessarily needed.
Well, we're not perfect. I'm not perfect.
No, I never said you were.
I made lots of mistakes, for sure. Which is why I wrote the book. It's like, right, I better get all my mistakes off.
We're going to continuously learn and develop as humans. We have, always.
But it's being honest, I think. I think honesty is such a massive thing.
Yes.
And if our leaders or you as the leader can be brutally honest and say, look, this is going on, this is my vision, how can we get there?
And I think also with general public, when someone comes out to show their vulnerability, they can either empathize with them or they can just knock them down even further and say, well, they're not worthy.
Yeah.
So we need to be more open-minded and have a growth mindset that even leaders are humans with mistakes and vulnerabilities, and we need to sort of see people for who they are and don't take away the good. Give credit when credit's due, because I think when we do come across certain stories of, great speakers, or they've made a certain mistake or they've done certain things, and then that's it, we out them completely, but they've still got something to give.
Of
But
course.
that's the other
That's
the other side of the human side of us also judging and discrediting people for that shortcoming.
That's because we have that shortcoming.
Yes.
Nothing to do with the leader.
No, of course.
They just.
But we want to see that perfection.
No, it doesn't
when
exist.
There's a leader. That's the thing.
Doesn't exist.
Imam Ali used to say, follow me, and he used to also say, I know that you can never follow me 100%.
Yeah.
Because he was infallible. He had access to the knowledge, which we can't have.
No.
So we can never reach to the conclusion Imam Ali could reach in his decisions. But he used to advise to follow him, and at the same time he used to say, I'm sure you would not be able to be exactly like me.
Yeah.
But making an effort is rewardable.
Exactly.
Making an effort to be like him, then wherever we reach, whatever success rate we achieve, will be rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because our intentions are sincere to follow the right role models. God will help as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's, and that's why I see it go wrong, is that we put people too much on a pedestal and give them that sort of perfection persona, and then when they do make mistakes, we totally shoot them
destroy
down.
them.
I know, destroy them literally, and we actually lose leaders that way, and even potential leaders. Well, we're coming towards the end of the show, and I just want to round up quickly, maybe giving some final thoughts. I know we've spoken very, widely about this topic, but it is wide, and it does go into parenting, it does go into society, community. It's, yes, we're talking about Muslims, but actually it's for a whole, because we need to represent. We're not just here for ourselves, we're here to represent ourselves to the wider world. That's how Islam started and should continue. And, a lot of Muslims are segregated and, not integrating, but we need to do that, because this is how we are here today because of that. Don't just stick to your own. Don't just feel like you have to be in a particular way. Even if you're a leader, be open, do what you need to do. So, any final thoughts, say it firstly before we close today?
We are all responsible for each other, and this is what Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wasalam used to say, that the tarbiyah and education starts from oneself. We have to educate ourselves. كلكم راع ومسؤول عن رعيته. Or he used to also say that start the tarbiyah and education and tazkiyah from yourself, and then your family members, and continue from there.
Thank you. And Dr. Haider?
I think it's important to communicate your long-term vision, what your leadership is about, and listen.
Thank you so much for all of your insights. Inshallah, we might have you back again, because it was a pleasure to have you today, and I'm sure we can learn from you even more with different topics. Thank you so much, Sayyid and Dr. Haider Hakim. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, viewers, for listening today. I hope this has been vital for your information and your learning and your growth. Inshallah, we hope to have more viewers call in and speak, and that's the first part of taking, steps to improving ourselves and, basically supporting what we do here. And at the same time, also, I hope it's learning for you, in order for you to take on these responsibilities, to become role models in your families, in society, community, and for the greater sort of environment around you. And inshallah, we will be back next week with another topic and new guests, including myself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.